prevent any background noise. Please note that today's webcast is being recorded, and a copy of today's presentation will be made available after the webcast. During the presentation, we will have a question and answer session. You can send in text questions at any time. Click the green Q&A icon on the lower left-hand corner of your screen, type your question in the open area, and then click Submit. If you would like to view the presentation in a full screen view, click the full screen button in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Press the Escape key on your keyboard to return to your original view. For optimal viewing and participation, please disable your pop-up blockers. And finally, should you need technical assistance, as a best practice, we suggest that you first refresh your browser. If that does not resolve the issue, please click on the support option in the upper right-hand corner of your screen for online troubleshooting. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. J.P. Sharp, J.D., MPH, is the CMS Innovation Center's MACRA lead. He joined CMS in 2014 and currently leads the development of MACRA Alternative Payment Model Policy. In the Seamless Care Models Group, he developed the next generation ACO model and led the legal and compliance monitoring activities for the Pioneer ACO model. Prior to working at CMS, JP clerked in government affairs at the Henry Ford Health System, in the Office of General Counsel at the University of Michigan Health System, and in medical legal partnership in Michigan. JP received his JD from the University of Michigan Law School, his MPH from the University of Michigan School of Public Health, and his AB in psychology from Harvard University. JP, you may begin.
All right, thank you. So today we will be doing our deep dive here on the Quality Payment Program and how it applies to the Medicare Shared Savings Program. So we'll really be focusing on the applicability to the ACOs in the Shared Savings Program, both on the MIPS side and with the incentives associated with advanced APM participation. So we will hop right in here. And so this is the intro slide you'll see in all of our presentations and webinars that we do, just to give a very broad overview of MACRA as a law that passed and where we came to develop the Quality Payment Program. So the headliner item of MACRA was the repeal of the Sustainable Growth Rate formula. And so that was repealed with MACRA, which opened then the opportunity for these new major tracks, which are the merit-based incentive payment system and these incentives for participating in advanced alternative payment models, or advanced APMs. And so this is a major change to the way we pay for Medicare, care under Medicare, both through traditional Medicare under Part B, but also really incentivizing participation in alternative payment models such as the Shared Savings Program. So we find this very exciting. Next slide. So I'm going to spend just a few slides giving an overview of MIPS, because there are relationships between MIPS and the APMs that are particularly unique, that will set the stage just with the overall the MIPS platform, and then we'll see how it applies to certain participants in the Shared Savings Program. So MIPS applies to Medicare Part B clinicians broadly. So we start off with that broad population, and then there are certain restrictions and exclusions so that MIPS doesn't necessarily apply to everybody. So the first bullet you see there is about a low volume threshold. So any clinicians that are billing more than $30,000 a year and provide care for more than 100 Medicare patients will be included in MIPS, and those who fall below those amounts, either of those amounts, would be excluded. The second point is really important too. So for the first couple of years at least, we have the opportunity to expand this clinician population in future years. But for these first few years in MIPS, it only applies to these particular clinician types. So physicians, physician assistants, nurse practitioners, clinical nurse specialists, and certified registered nurse anesthetists. So when we talk about applying MIPS, so MIPS payment adjustments, they would only apply to people who fall into these categories and are not excluded. Next slide. These are a few more of the exclusionary criteria. So you'll see the second bullet we discussed is the low volume threshold. The first one there is for newly enrolled Medicare clinicians. So like the low volume threshold, anybody who is in their first year of Medicare participation, payment adjustments would just not apply to them for that first year. The third bullet's where we have a tie-in to advanced APM track. So clinicians who are identified as qualifying APM participants, and we'll get to that definition later in the presentation, but so clinicians who are significantly participating in these advanced APMs are also excluded from MIPS, and so will not have any reporting requirements or payment adjustments associated with MIPS. So this is how the tracks of the Shared Savings Program line up with respect to MIPS and the advanced APM track. And there are a few nuances in here that we'll talk about throughout the presentation, but just generally, before we dive in, so you can see what's most relevant when we get there. So track 1 is considered a MIPS APM, and again, we'll talk about these definitions a little bit later, but track 1 participants will be participating in MIPS, so it'll be in that MIPS track of the Quality Payment Program. However, we have a special scoring standard that will apply to those participants so that we have a relatively seamless and low-burden transition into MIPS rather than having them as two separate programs. And then you'll see tracks 2 and 3 with respect to the Quality Payment Program are treated equally. They are both considered advanced APMs, and so that will apply when we're talking about those incentives associated with advanced APM participation. First thing, since we were on the topic of MIPS, we'll talk about track 1 of the Shared Savings Program and what it means for that to be a MIPS APM and how we score those participants in a special way there. So very broadly, we have this category of certain types of alternative payment models that we call MIPS APMs. And so track 1 is a MIPS APM. And the goal of this type of APM that we've designated is, as I said a little earlier, is to reduce the reporting burden across the board and make sure that participants in track 1 of the Shared Savings Program focus very clearly on what the Shared Savings Program requires of it and the goals there so that there are no duplicative or competing requirements between the Shared Savings Program and MIPS. And then the general output is that we take care of a lot of the individual performance categories by streamlining the reporting or using APM performance with respect to the MIPS scores. And the end result is that all of those scores, the different performance categories within MIPS, they're all rolled up to that ACO level. So everybody in the ACO will receive the same final score under MIPS and the subsequent payment adjustments under MIPS. So this is just a little information. This, we've told you that track 1 of the Shared Savings Program is a MIPS APM, and this will apply this APM scoring standard to those ACOs. But there are a few other APMs that are also MIPS APMs because we set forth these criteria. So these are here for your information, just why the track 1 of the Shared Savings Program is a MIPS APM. But again, we can't tell you that answer, so you don't have to worry about how it stacks up to these criteria. Yeah. So this next slide is a set of key dates. So when we're talking about MIPS and the APM scoring standard for track 1 participants, we need to determine to which clinicians this will actually apply, because as we saw in those early slides, MIPS applies to specific individual clinicians. And we identify those by their TIN and NPI combinations so that those MIPS payment adjustments can apply to those particular individuals. So how we do that is we have these 3 snapshot dates during the course of a performance year. And those are the ones you see here, March 31, June 30, and August 31. And those are the dates where we look and see to the participant TINs in each ACO and which NPIs have their billing reassigned to those TINs. So then we can capture that group at that point in time and say, for certain, these individual clinicians are part of that ACO for the purposes of MIPS. So on March 31st, we'll take a look and we'll say that is who we're considering part of this ACO for the APM scoring standard. But then when we get to June 30th, we'll take another look and we'll include everybody who's in that first snapshot. So nobody's going to be pulled out of that. So you're definitely in if we capture you. But we'll also add in people who have come into the ACO in that interim time between March 31st and June 30th. So, and we'll do that same thing again for that last snapshot. So it's an additive process. So nobody's going to get their status as a participant yanked out, but we will continuously add as the ACO adds individuals at those 3 dates. So this is another kind of general slide just to give you an idea of which APMs are MIPS APMs. So they'll have similar MIPS scoring as Track 1 participants have. But again, this is an informational one for you, and so we'll focus on how this particularly applies to the Shared Savings Program participants. And then this is an important table here, and this is pulled from the final rule, and we have various fact sheets that we'll point you to at the end of the website. But this is how we actually score the ACOs in the Shared Savings Program under MIPS. So this is what the APM scoring standard really means with respect to each of those 4 performance categories in MIPS. So you see at the top row there is the quality performance category. And what we do there is actually transfer the scores from your reporting that you already do for the Shared Savings Program. So we'll use that exact same reporting through the CMS web interface and use that reporting for purposes of MIPS. So really there's no additional reporting that you have to do to report quality to MIPS. The second category is cost, and for that we have weighted that to 0%. So we'll actually not assess you under MIPS under cost because you're being assessed for your cost performance under the Shared Savings Program. So we don't duplicate or conflict with that. We just will not include any cost assessment under MIPS for you. The third one is improvement activities. And so this is a little different if you had looked at the proposed rule compared to what we finalized. And so what we finalized here is that you will have no additional reporting required for this category either. We'll actually assign this score to you. And we assign the score based on the activities you're already required to do as participants of the Shared Savings Program. And so we compare those requirements that you have under the Shared Savings Program with the improvement activities that are available under MIPS. And we just assign those points to you already. And what we found, and we've made this determination already, is that you have enough requirements under the Shared Savings Program to meet the maximum score under this improvement activities category. So therefore, we will automatically assign you a 100% in this category. The last one is actually the only component that requires some reporting for purposes of MIPS, and that's the advancing care information category. And this is the EHR component to MIPS. And so as we have it, you will need to report for each TIN in the ACO according to the MIPS rules. So MIPS has its own standard rules for reporting the advancing care information category. And so that's all you'll be required to do, is for each TIN in the ACO to go in and do the advancing care information category. That will be rolled up along with all of these scores for the performance categories to a single ACO score. And that will be applied to each of those TIN and PI combinations of the clinicians in the ACO, which will then be associated to a payment adjustment for you. So I know that was a lot packed in there for the MIPS part. Now we'll get into how we define alternative payment models generally, and advanced APMs, and then what those bonuses mean, how we determine who gets the incentives under those advanced APM tracks. So the first slide on APMs is just the statutory definition of what an APM is. And so this is the same as the proposed rule. It just sets out that the world of APMs in general are those that are created under the CMS Innovation Center, the Shared Savings Program, so all the tracks are considered APMs generally, and then any other federal demonstrations required by law. Okay, so the next slide here is just describing a little bit more about what an APM is generally. I won't spend too much time on that because you are in one. So the main point is that on the right you'll see, and we'll go into the next slide here, is that advanced APMs are a subset of that universe of APMs. So on these advanced APM slides, we just described that these are generally more rigorous types of APMs. They have certain requirements, and we'll look at those specific requirements, what makes an APM an advanced APM in a second. But it's an important point here to step back and focus what the quality payment program does with respect to these advanced APMs. There's no changes to the requirements within those advanced APMs themselves. So the rules of the Shared Savings Program aren't changing because of the quality payment program. All those terms and conditions still apply. What the quality payment program does is add this extra layer of incentives for participants in those advanced APMs. So when we're talking about tracks 2 and 3 of the Shared Savings Program, those rules still apply. Everything will happen as according to the Shared Savings Program. Just those participants will be eligible for this additional 5% lump sum incentive payment. And we'll talk about how that's calculated, but you see that that's kind of summarized on the right side of the screen. And so this slide here just summarizes the overall incentives associated with being in an advanced APM. And we'll talk about how participants become qualifying APM participants in a little bit. But these qualifying APM participants, one, as we saw very early on, they're excluded from MIPS. So no MIPS reporting requirements, no MIPS payment adjustments. You receive this 5% lump sum bonus that we just talked about. And then there's this long-term incentive. So that 5% lump sum bonus is limited in time. It's really to boost participation early on in the quality payment program into advanced APMs. The last payments will be made in 2024 for that lump sum bonus. The long-term incentive is what you see at the bottom there. So the fee schedule will actually split into 2 tracks. So there will be a qualifying APM participant track and one for everybody who is not a qualifying APM participant. And so there will be a higher update rate each year for QP, so that there will be this higher fee schedule rate. So over time, it will become a bigger and bigger incentive to be in an advanced APM relative to it being in traditional Medicare or other APMs that are not advanced APMs. And then this is just a conceptual slide. We use this with the proposed rule as well, and we think that this just helps lay out side by side what we've been talking about. So on the left side, you say if you're not in an APM, people not in APMs are subject to the MIPS adjustments. So in an APM that is not an advanced APM, so that's the track 1 column there, you see we have MIPS adjustments. but of course we'll score those participants in that special APM scoring standard. Then additionally, we want to make sure people remember that we're not changing the rules of the APM themselves, so you have those rewards available in track 1 of the shared savings program, and those remain unchanged. And then on the right, we have that advanced APM column. So exemption from MIPS, additionally, those APM-specific rewards, which can be larger than those in general in the APM column, and then that 5% lump sum bonus. So these next slides here, we get into the criteria for what makes an APM an advanced APM. And I'm going to go relatively quickly through these because what we do is we tell you the output of this at the end. So whenever we have an APM, we make the determination. We look at the terms and conditions of that APM and decide whether it meets these criteria based on the structure of the APM itself. So how the shared savings program is designed is what we look at, and we see if it checks these 3 boxes. And if so, then it's determined to be an advanced APM. So these are the 3 advanced APM criteria. We'll go through these in the next few slides, but again, we'll show you the output at the end of this, and we have this available on our qpp.cms.gov website, and we'll flash that website link later on. But the point is that we have done this activity for the shared savings program already and determined that tracks 2 and 3 are advanced APMs. So this is just if we want to look at the math and show our work here. So next slide. So the first criterion is based on requiring the use of certified EHR technology. And so we had a specific carve-out in the shared savings program. It's a little different than how we assess the other APMs, because under the shared savings program, there is a reward or penalty for the degree of certified EHR technology use. And so that applies here, and that's how the shared savings program meets this criterion, is that it is a measure that feeds into your shared savings or losses. Next slide. The next one is about quality measures. And so the requirement that we set is that there must be quality measures that are tied to payment. And those quality measures themselves must be comparable to those in MIPS. And we've determined comparable to mean any quality measures that are evidence-based, reliable, and valid. And those can be MIPS measures themselves, or can come from a variety of other sources. But by virtue of using the web interface measures, which are themselves also MIPS measures, that meets this requirement here for the second criterion. And then the third one is the financial risk criterion, and this is the key one that distinguishes between tracks 1 and then tracks 2 and 3. And so we really look at the second part of the either or, because the shared savings program is not a medical home model that's been expanded under CMS Innovation Center Authority, so that doesn't apply. So we're really looking at that second part for this criterion. So it's whether the shared savings program requires participants to bear more than nominal financial risk. And so we split that into 2 parts, and you'll see on the left is what is bearing financial risk, and you'll see that that is withholding payment, reducing payment rates, or requiring payment to CMS. So that's the distinguishing point. And then on the right, you'll see that there must be a certain amount of that risk. And this is something that changed. Again, this doesn't change the determinations of whether tracks 2 and 3 are advanced APMs, but we made this different than what we did under the proposed rule to make this, one, much simpler by eliminating marginal risk components and minimum loss rates, so that we're only looking at the maximum total risk that participants bear under the model, so we don't have to think about those other moving pieces. We also created this extra option that instead of just looking at a percentage of the benchmark for those expected expenditures that must be at risk, we allow a model to be designed on, or an APM to be designed on, the revenue of its participants so that there can be a total risk cap associated with revenue rather than that total cost of care benchmark. And so you'll see that when we provide more information and talk about what we've considered for Track 1+, and we have that in a few of our other rollout materials and fact sheets. And so this is the output. So as promised, we'll have this available on the qpp.cms.gov website. And so for 2017, so our first performance period, these are the APMs that are advanced APMs. And so this is the first opportunity. Of course, we have a big effort to increase the opportunities in general for people to join advanced APMs. So there will be more of these coming out for 2018 and in subsequent years, and we'll update this list whenever we have new information for you. So the next part, which is a little bit more relevant to your actual participation, because all of the advanced APM criteria, we actually have done that already. We've determined where the tracks in the shared savings program fall. But then the next step is determining which participants are qualifying APM participants. So this is for tracks 2 and 3. This is how do we go from participating in an advanced APM to qualifying APM participants, who are the people who receive those incentives that we talked about. And so this is set forth in the laws, this extra step to make sure that participants are substantially committed to the APM they're in. And so we do this looking at two different factors, and that's the percentage of Part B payments through the advanced APM, and then the percentage of Part B patients through that advanced APM. And so we'll look at both of those, and we'll go through how we calculate these percentages in the next few slides. But the second bullet's important. It's not immediately relevant to the shared savings program, but it allows in the third year we'll consider payments through all other payers, not just through Medicare. So here you're seeing the first step of several of how we do these QP calculations. So the first point in general is that we will do these at an ACO level. So we'll take all of the participants in the ACO and we'll calculate them as a group. So it'll be a group determination as opposed to doing it on an individual basis. So everybody in that ACO will be a QP together or not a QP together. Next slide. The next one here, we have a couple points on this. And so we calculate this percentage threshold score for each ACO. So for that group that we were talking about in the last slide, we will calculate this percentage score, and we'll compare it to these thresholds to see whether or not you meet those thresholds overall. So this is based on a ratio between actually attributed, so in the shared savings program I know you use the term assigned, so we kind of use the general term attributed here across all APMs, but so this will be looking at assigned beneficiaries over the attribution eligible or assignable beneficiaries, though we have our own definition that we use universally for the quality payment program there. But that's the general theory, is who are the people you're responsible for through the shared savings program, and then who are the people you see more broadly under Part B of Medicare. And this breaks it into those two pieces. So we talked about there's two ways you look at it. Looking at Part B payments and then the Part B patients. And we actually do both of these calculations for each ACO. So we'll calculate this payment amount method on the left and the patient count method on the right. So we'll do both of them simultaneously, and we'll actually pick the one that's better. So if you're above the threshold with one and below the threshold with the other, we'll consider you to have met the threshold overall. So we'll do them in parallel with one another. And then these here are the thresholds themselves. So we calculate that percentage that we were talking about based on that ratio, and then we compare it to this table here. And you'll see the payment amount method has, on that first row, its own set of thresholds, and then below that are the patient count thresholds, and they're a little different. The payment amount ones were set in the statute, and then we finalized in our rule these patient count ones that we think are similar, so they're comparable. But they increase over time, both of these threshold amounts, so they become more difficult to reach over time. However, we will note that we expect that Track 2 and 3 participants, especially in these early years when the thresholds are low, that all the ACOs will be able to meet these thresholds. So we want to relieve a little anxiety there. We'll also do, early in 2017, we'll calculate some preliminary estimates based on historical behaviors. So we'll as if you were participating in the quality program in previous years. So we'll give you some preliminary estimates there early on in 2017 to help you understand about where your percentage threshold scores land, so you can see about where you would be relative to these thresholds here in the table. And then this last point is really just following up on the first point to say that we've done this determination as a group. If the ACO collectively gets above those thresholds, then all of those individual clinicians participating, so those TIN NPI combinations, we will identify them as qualifying APM participants, or QPs. An important point, though, is that although we do that calculation based on that list of TIN NPIs we have associated with the ACO, when we identify an individual as a QP, that actually sticks to their NPI. So that individual person and their NPI is a QP across all of their billing TINs. So when we get to that payment in the payment year and whether or not they're excluded from MIPS, they would be excluded from MIPS across all of their TINs, and we would calculate that incentive payment across all of their TINs. And this is just a little conceptual on the time frame, so we'll get into what this performance period is that we're looking at for the QP calculations. So this is relatively parallel to how MIPS runs with a few different specific dates. But the first performance period will be 2017, during the 2017 calendar year. However, it is a little truncated, so we start on January 1 and look through August 31st overall. And we actually do a number of different determinations during that period that we'll look at in just a moment. But so that's the performance period, and we look at, are you in an advanced APM? So if you're in tracks 2 and 3, then you're in an advanced APM, and we use those data from this period to determine that threshold score and whether or not you are a qualifying APM participant. Then the next step is, for those QPs, we calculate how much their incentive payment will be. And so we look at the entire calendar year of 2018, or that next year, and look at all the Part B professional services furnished by QPs. And we add up those payments and take 5% of that. And then we make that payment during the payment year. So that first payment year is 2019. And so we'll send that as a lump sum payment out. So you see that stepwise approach from performance period to calculate that incentive and then make the payment. And then that will repeat every year. So you'll have a 2018 performance period associated with a 2020 payment year. And very similar to the slides we saw earlier when we were talking about MIPS APMs and the APM scoring standard for Track 1, the same dates apply. So this will all be done so that they're parallel to one another. But this is for the QP determination. So this is the exact same thing we talked about earlier. You're defining who those individual people are participating in Track 2 and 3 ACOs. So we'll do these snapshots. So on March 31st, we'll look at that participant list and we'll see which NPIs have their billing reassigned to the participant TINs. And we'll take that list. And then June 30th, we'll see if there are any additional NPIs that have joined the ACO at that point, and we'll add them to that group, but we wouldn't take anybody away from that first snapshot. And then the same thing happens on August 31st, so it's this additive group. So we'll take those 3 points in time, and that will be how we determine who is in the ACO. However, it's a little different with the QPs, and we'll go to the next slide, because we'll actually do a QP determination associated with each of those snapshot dates. And we did this because we got a lot of feedback from the proposed rule that people wanted to know as early as possible whether or not they were going to be exempt from MIPS, whether they were going to get this incentive. So we're going to do this 3 times during the course of the performance period, so that at the early end, people can know relatively early in the year, about June or July or August, rather, about whether they are confirmed to be QPs. You'll see the 1, the 2, and the 3 there associated with those snapshot dates, and we'll do a different determination each time. So I'll walk through 1, and I know this is a little technical, and we're going to work on additional materials to flesh this out and make sure it's very clear. But we'll basically do, look there on number 1, we'll take at point B, that's that snapshot date. So everybody in the ACO at that point, we'll take a look at them. And we will use all the data from January 1 through that date. And looking at that, we'll make a determination that will complete at point D. And then we'll do it again. So using that new group, if there were any added people into that ACO for the second one, at that second point B, we'll use data from January 1 up through point B there, do the calculation, have that ready at that point D. And then we'll do that one more time. So January 1 through that third snapshot date using that larger group. So there are 3 chances to become a QP, and we will notify you at the very latest at the end of that performance period. And then this just reiterates that in reaching that threshold at any of these 3 determinations will make somebody a QP. So if you are in that ACO in the first one and you're not in the second, or you don't meet that threshold in the second one, all those people who are in that ACO in the first one will still be QPs. So this is, I won't spend too much time on this, but there's this component of partial QPs. And so there's a little space in these thresholds beneath the QP thresholds that we looked at where someone can be a partial QP. So they didn't quite make it to that QP status, so they won't get that 5% incentive payment. However, partial QPs still get a little recognition for being an advanced APM. And the advantage of being a partial QP is that you'll be able to choose whether or not you participate in MIPS. However, you will not get the 5% bonus. So if you land in that territory, you won't get that extra bonus payment, but you can decide if you want to do MIPS or not do MIPS. As we said earlier, we expect that all the ACOs in tracks 2 and 3 will meet that full QP threshold, especially in those early years where it's a little bit lower. All right, then we just have a few more slides here, and then we'll wrap up and have some time for questions at the end. So as I stated earlier, this is our website, qpp.cms.gov. It has a great overview of the quality payment program in general, but it also has a little bit more information on MIPS and what the pick your pace element means. However, as applicable to the shared savings program and ACOs, I think we covered everything here that's the most salient for you as participants. But the website gives great overview of the overall program and has a tab on the top that you can find that says Education and Tools. And there you'll see things like fact sheets, our full list of APMs and which ones are advanced APMs and MIPS APMs, and how we made those improvement activities determinations for track 1 participants to make sure that they get 100% in that category. So we have a lot of materials there, including the final rule itself and an executive summary that we recommend you read if you're not going to dive into the final rule itself. So I think with that, we've gotten a lot of questions through the chat over the course of this. So we're going to take just a little minute to look at those questions that you've submitted, and we'll come back on and give you some answers to those. Okay, thanks for hanging in there with us. We'll take this first question, which is, we had a few different questions related to the relationship between advanced APMs and MIPS APMs and which tracks fall into which categories. And so I'll step through each of these. So track 1 is a MIPS APM and only a MIPS APM. So those participants will be participating in MIPS, and we'll score them according to that APM scoring standard as we discussed. And we really focused on, for tracks 2 and 3, we focused on the fact that they're advanced APMs. However, when we get into the details a little more, they are also MIPS APMs. However, the advanced APM participants, if they become QPs, those qualifying APM participants, they're excluded from MIPS, so we don't have to look at any of that MIPS data. However, in the event that track 2 or 3 ACO does not meet those QP thresholds, and then they are subject to MIPS, we would score them under the advanced or the APM scoring standards. So they are considered a MIPS APM, and that's really the fallback. So we'll have that nice APM scoring standard ready, so there's not a whole lot of extra reporting that you have to do in the case that you happen to miss one of those thresholds. One of the other questions was based on the pick your pace element, and I know I breezed over that a little bit. And then how it really doesn't apply to what we're talking about for the shared savings program. But pick your pace was something that we made a big change from the proposed to final rule with respect to MIPS. And it was the driving force behind that is making sure that we get a high degree of participation in MIPS for people who may not have participated in previous reporting programs like PQRS or the value modifier, so that people don't have to be at risk for a negative adjustment if they're just getting into the program. So it enables people to do just a little bit of reporting and avoid a negative adjustment in this transition year that we have, so the first year coming up. And then incrementally, more positive adjustments can be attained by doing more reporting. However, in the shared savings program context, we have this APM scoring standard set up for you so that you already are having this minimum amount of reporting done for you on your behalf just by virtue of doing quality reporting through the shared savings program and having those improvement activities assigned to you. So really, you're already above and in that kind of positive territory for MIPS just by virtue of being in a shared savings program ACO. So some of the other questions that we saw were a little bit more detail about the APM scoring standard and what is needed for purposes of MIPS. So we came back here to slide 13 to look at this table, and we'll walk through it one more time to make sure that we're clear here. So, so in the quality category, the quality reporting that you do through the shared savings program is what we'll use for MIPS. So do your reporting through the web interface, and that score will also be used for MIPS. So the ACO will do that web interface reporting, and that is what will count for MIPS. So no separate entering of information, no going into a different location or portal, just one process there for both the shared savings program and MIPS in quality. For the cost category, again, we've reduced that weight to 0, so there will be no assessment under cost. And then the improvement activities category, we actually automatically assign you a 100% score. So again, there's no additional reporting necessary for that category. We will just have that credited to your MIPS score when you go into the portal there. So that should show up automatically for you. The last one is that each of the ACO participant TINs will actually have to report the advancing care information category. So that's something where you will have to actively do something for purposes of the MIPS score. So we'll need each of your TINs to go into the MIPS advancing care information system, and there are a variety of mechanisms that you can do this reporting. And so we'll refer you to that, and we'll have more information about that, what that means in the future. But you'll actually have to do that component of the MIPS reporting. So that's the one piece that you'll have to actually focus on and do the reporting under MIPS. The rest will actually be taken care of you passively. Yeah, another component, we didn't highlight this in this slide deck, but this is an important piece that we put in the final rule. So we wanted to highlight that for purposes of being an advanced APM, tracks 2 and 3 have a requirement associated with EHR use, and we'll be doing that using the advancing care information reporting requirements. So part of participating in any track of the shared savings program, but particularly not with respect to MIPS, but just the shared savings program itself, you'll need to report advancing care information. So for tracks 2 and 3 ACOs, you will also need to report advancing care information. It won't go over to a MIPS score because if you are a QP, you'll be exempt from MIPS. However, that will be used for purposes of your shared savings calculations for your measurements under the shared savings program. So it is both used for the shared savings program and for MIPS. So one question that we saw is just asking whether Track 1 ACOs are eligible for any type of bonus. And so in the sense of the 5% bonus that we're talking about for advanced APM participation, the answer is no. So there's no additional bonus associated with that. However, as we've just discussed, the APM scoring standard will help those Track 1 participants perform under MIPS, but there's no additional bonus under the Quality Payment Program for Track 1 ACOs. Okay, so I think we've covered the major categories of questions that we've seen here. So we wanted to talk just a second about ACO Track 1 Plus because we know there's a lot of interest in that. And so we have information, as we noted, on qpp.cms.gov and the fact sheets, and we discussed it a little bit in the final rule as well. But Track 1 Plus is something where we're just exploring a new opportunity for an ACO model that would have some degree of financial risk that would be associated with our advanced APM criteria. So we would intend for this to be an advanced APM opportunity in the future. So we'll have more information about that coming out next year, and so keep your eyes on the qpp.cms.gov, and we'll provide more information as we go there. So I think that covers everything that we wanted to go over today. We really appreciate your questions coming in, and we'll have more webinars generally about the Quality Payment Program and be producing more materials for you to see how this will impact you in the future. So thank you, and goodbye.